course, the Hawkeyes hit the field in a few weeks at fall camp. Before that, it will be the pinnacle of talking season at Big Ten Media Days in Indianapolis. We got Elliot K here from the Rivals platform for Iowa Athletics, Hawkeye Beacon. Elliot, what's going on today?
Not a whole lot, Mark. Well, I guess a lot. Very busy day so far between off-season content. Women's basketball is they had media availability today, so our Adam Jacoby is there. Of course, not huge interest on Voice of College Football, but talking a little bit of recruiting on the board. Basketball recruit just got signed up for an official visit with Iowa too. A lot of that's going on right now. Of course, always talking with sources here with you. We're recording a podcast today, so a whole lot of stuff happening behind the scenes.
Let's start with recruiting. 5 or 6 commits just here in the last month. Pretty standard in regards to the path that's been taken and also the success rate at this point.
Yeah, that's kind of how it goes with Iowa. They get those string of commits throughout the year, and then that big official weekend hits, and everything, the rest of the class more or less fills out. It didn't exactly go that way with Iowa. Not even last year's Xavier Lucas ended up committing to Wisconsin. He's there in Madison now with that 2024 class. But a couple other players who ended up deciding they wanted to go elsewhere. But I think it was 4 commits off the official visit weekend. So not as big of a class this year for Iowa as it was last year. But pretty much how it goes. Still waiting on Yosef, waiting on Scott Starzik, still waiting on Terrence Smith. But pretty successful overall weekend for Iowa. And I think they're largely happy with the class they have so far. Still a little bit of work to do, but I think they're off to a really solid start. They're not going to show it in those rankings. A lot of that is based on numbers. Plus, Iowa has a knack for bringing in 3 stars and developing, right? They're not going to be those tippy-top recruiting classes. Just 1 4-star in Thomas Meyer, but they're happy with what they've got so far.
So based on the group that's already come in, the 12 hard commits, any particular players that stand out for you? Maybe not necessarily the headliners, but guys that you really think could be strong?
The headliner would be that Thomas Meyer, right? Because he is the only 4-star. But looking at the rest of the class, I mean, it's pretty easy to just kind of pick and choose who you want because there are those just tons of 3-stars in this class. Personally, I go back to one of the first commits in this class in Burt Goucher, who just ran a 4.4 140 at camp. He had been committed for, I think, 6 months, decided to camp at Iowa anyway. And he's going to be a linebacker. So he'll probably play that will spot, maybe even the cash, because he has experience at safety. He has experience at quarterback. So that's a position where you can really do so many different things. I think he's a super underrated athlete. Our 4 schools in the Midwest, but he's a guy that I really like. I really like Lucas Allgaier from the St. Louis area. We have him listed as a defensive tackle on Rivals, and that's kind of a trend for how Iowa likes to recruit their offensive linemen, at least under George Barnett. They want those guys who are nasty. They want those guys who are athletes, but Allgaier will be playing probably right tackle for Iowa. He very well could have played defensive tackle at the next level too. You watch his film and it's like, that dude is nasty. So those are 2 of my favorites, but I also like Brad Fitzgibbon a lot from Chicago Marist, same high school as John Nestor, who's looking to have a breakout second year at Iowa. He's at a private school in Chicago that is known for its academics, and he's a 4.6 cumulative GPA. He communicates a lot. Like, he makes me think of Aaron Graves. I'm sure that name rings a bell. National Max Preps Athlete of the Year in 2022. Maybe not quite that level of athlete, but one thing that I've continually thought and mentioned on broadcasts like this, on our podcast, on radio, that I don't write about Brad Fitzgibbon because it sounds a little clunky and it looks a little clunky, I guess, is Brad Fitzgibbon is really good at effing the play up, right? Like he's that's not necessarily a stat that goes down, but he's going to get into your backfield and disrupt whatever you have going on. And he was a kid that I future casted to Iowa the moment after I talked to him, because you could tell he had that air about him of not only loving the idea of being a Hawkeye, but kind of behaving as Hawkeyes have, especially at that defensive tackle spot, if that makes sense, in high school. His mannerisms, the way he talked about Kelvin Bell, it was like, this is a lock. He hasn't told me he's committed to Iowa. He hasn't told me anything like that, but it was very clear from the get-go. Went on his official visits to Michigan State and Kansas, and then ultimately committed to Iowa after that official. Those are three that stick out to me off the top of my head. But I mean, you could go down the list. I like Carson Cooney. I like Joey Van Wetzinga. I think he's a perfect fit at center for Iowa. Charles Bell might be the most underrated player in this class, and he's pretty recent. 6'2", 170 at corner, ball skills, fluid hips. And you put all those tangible things in front of Phil Parker, and he's going to make something out of it, right? So a lot of players I like in this class, especially from a developmental perspective. Not a lot of, plug and play in this class, obviously, because it's Iowa. But those are the things that stick out to me. It's like, you see the things that Phil Parker, that Kirk Ferentz, that George Barnett can take and mold into something that is one of those future NFL draft picks that Iowa puts together so frequently.
Well, Elliot, I don't know if effing it up actually can translate to like advanced metrics elevation there, if you can quite get it there. But these stats start somewhere, so you could make a new category and it might catch on.
Hey, PFF, give me a call.
There we go. Elliot Clough's here from Hawkeye Beacon and on the Rivals platform for Iowa Athletics. And of course, we're talking recruiting, we're talking football, and you mentioned the Epinesa recruitment. Of course, you talk about a legacy. Well, it's recent, it's current. And my Miami contacts, though, are awfully confident. I don't know if that's just vibrato down there, but where do you stand on that lean and some other targets that are in line right now in terms of your feel for where they might choose?
Sure. Yosei is a tough one, and for a variety of reasons. Epi is very much involved. His father is very much involved, very much an Iowa Hawkeye. So is AJ. And they're not super public about how they feel about things. At least that's what I've garnered and been able to gather in covering this recruitment. From a vantage point of talking to some sources around the program, I had heard the official visit went well. At the same time, it doesn't sound like it's a lock at all with Iowa, as some folks probably thought from the get-go when Iowa offered him, and for good reason, right? But Miami has things that Iowa can't offer, right? Miami can pay him a lot of money. Miami has who's the pass rusher, Jason Taylor, as their coach. Miami's Miami. They got beaches, right? It's not Iowa. And I think that is a major pull in and of itself, is the fact that it's not Iowa. He's the younger brother. He has a little bit of that, as far as I've been able to tell, not wanting to follow that legacy. So, I don't blame your Miami contacts for being, maybe outwardly confident, because I'm not when it comes to Yosei. Now, with other guys like Terrence Smith Jr., who's a French 4-star for us, he's from the Aurora area, wide receiver. He's the only receiver that appears to be an actual probability for Iowa that they've offered, because so much of them have already committed, and a lot of them, if you're a high-level wide receiver, like at this point, why are you considering Iowa, right? That if we're just being frank. With Terrence, his recruitment, I think, has been smaller than it should be. I know some outlets consider him to be a 4-star. His offers right now that appear to be players are Iowa and Minnesota. Took officials to both. Purdue offered late. He might go on, if he decides to put off his commitment, he might go on an official to Purdue. He might do that even with his commitment. One thing he told me is that he wants to see the Iowa offense in action before he commits. And what that tells me is that he's probably leaning Minnesota. And from what he's also told me is that it sounds like his commitment is going to be coming soon. And that also lends itself to Minnesota to me. Maybe 50-50 right now. He did really enjoy his official visit to Iowa. He really likes Jimmy Sullivan, the quarterback at Iowa that committed. He didn't feel pressure to commit or anything like that at Iowa, which, based on some stories I've heard about Minnesota, they don't operate like that. So that might be advantage Iowa. And then with Scott Starzik, from what I can tell right now, it's between Iowa and Syracuse. Those are the two official visits he's taken. Those are probably his best offers. I'd have to go and look at his offer list. I think Mississippi State offered him as well. So that might be an official visit he ends up taking here sooner rather than later. He does have preferred walk-ons at, I think, Oklahoma, and there's another one on there. I'd have to look, but number 1 kicker in the country according to Cole's Kicking, and number 4 punter, I think. Thing with Iowa for him is he'd probably have to redshirt because Drew Stevens would be in his senior year when Starzyk would end up there, and Starzyk wants to play sooner rather than later. Can't blame him. Number 1 kicker in the country. So that's a factor, but at the same time, with the track record of LeVar Woods being the number 1 kicker in the country, you're going to be there with Reese Dakin, who's going to be one of the better punters in the country. I think Starzyk told me that he probably will end up committing in August. And, you know, I think a lot of what it comes down to as well is the struggles Iowa's offense has had. He's like, I mean, he wants to be able to put up points, right? Putting up points is being in an opponent's territory. Iowa didn't do that a lot last year. And of course, Drew Stevens didn't even kick a field goal for a good chunk of the last season. Marshall Meter hit the kick against Nebraska, and then that was it for the rest of the season because they got shut out against Michigan and Tennessee. So you're going to be a kicker and spend a bunch of time on the sideline? I don't think that's all that attractive. So we'll see. So much of Iowa's future, not only on the field, but in terms of recruiting, is contingent on how Tim Lester does with this offense.
And so maybe the selling point, Elliot, is we've improved the offense. Now we're going to bog down in the red zone and you'll get a lot of opportunities. Maybe that's the selling point now.
Maybe, yeah. Yeah. We're actually exclusively kicking field goals for the remainder of Tim Lester's tenure. So, yeah.